over time have evolved it to a point where they pretty much know what works and what doesn't work. And they've worked to refine those guidelines as much. I'm not sure Hong Kong should take it to that level, but we can learn something from New York for sure. This is an example in Pittsburgh, and I think I am from Pittsburgh. PPG Place at that time was considered as a very successful project because it gave a lot of public open space back to the city. And when the tower was being developed, another thing that was written in the guidelines was that there was a market square nearby. The tower could not be placed in an area where it will cast a shadow into the market square, which was a public space. So there were very stringent guidelines even for making this development happen and its implications on the surrounding space. I think we need to look at those things as well. So that's the PPG open space and the market space on the right side. And if you go to Singapore, I think they do pretty good, because when they put out a tender for sale, they actually have detailed guidelines of what they would like the development to look like, including the public space. And they have a management control method also that they develop. They would expect the developer to develop and then hand it over to the city to maintain. And even if the developer takes it back, it's on short-term leases, I think, again, to manage the place. So this is very clear, and I think when we were part of the tour of Harbour Enhancement Committee, there is a line, that invisible line, which says this part is public space and that part is managed by the private. And they manage it quite well doing that, and I think we can learn from Singapore. And Singapore is already quite a green city, but they're still talking about putting more green at various levels and making it even more greener. So I think we can learn from New York and Singapore. If you go to local examples, we have Times Square, everybody talked about it. I still think, I know it's a passageway, but I still think the way it works, it's at least at ground level, it's accessible visibly and also physically. In spite of its controversy, I think it can act as a good public space, but the controversy, I mean, they need to manage it better and allow people to use the space. And give, maybe the way to do it is give bonus, do something to encourage better use of the space. And we have, like, occasions where at different times that it's used better. Another example is Kowloon Station, which has the podium space, totally inaccessible, and I don't think it's used as well as a result. And this again, when we talk about public spaces, we cannot classify just by spatial configuration, like plaza, court, and everything. I think what's important to classify also by its use, how well it's being used, and what is it being used for. I think that classification is important as well for it to be considered as successful public space. And so, and again, in this case, I would definitely encourage some way of like seeing how this can be used better. And what can we do? I think that should be not like we can just forgive about it. So there are some restaurants, but it's still not as visible from the ground level. The other thing that is, this was quite surprising. I recently went to City Walk, not too close from here, but I found that actually this is a development that opens up at ground level, and there's open space. I think it's Sino development. But they got some, I think, bad publicity for the wall development or something. But when you look at the actual development with the public space and integration, I think they've done quite a good job of integrating with street level interface and accessible public space, with a lot of variety of seating areas as well. The other thing is my response. I know these guidelines are there. Sometimes I'm a little bit worried about guidelines is because we can pretend that they might be good for how to implement or design, But if you consider them specifically only for the space without considering what's happening around, I think it's, again, not very useful. And it also, the edge conditions of the square or whatever you're talking about makes a difference. If this same square or this area is bounded by blank walls all around, it's going to have one character. If it's bound by active open spaces in between, around, it's going to become a new public space. So I think those are areas that needs to be clarified. And there are also other issues that linkage issues are important as well. And if you keep looking at, I think it's good actually one way that you have the guidelines and you also have examples that are good and that could be better, which is a good thing. But I feel that Hong Kong still needs people to go and actually make an inventory of existing public spaces and actually do a rating of what is successful, what is not successful in a proper way, and commend people who are actually contributing to the city with good public space in these developments. So those are some of the issues. And when you come into actually, I think I would go flip into the management part. Another thing is, as I mentioned before, it has to be accessible from ground or the multiple level. Like if you take Exchange Square, it functions better because it's very accessible, at least from the upper level. So you need to have that accessibility, I think, is important. And on the management part, if you have the access, you don't have the activities, and you cannot allow people to use the space, then again it's failed. So these are some of the responses. And in terms of landscape panel, I think I agree with Roger. A lot of our problems stem from Town Planning Board. Permitting and allowing developments that actually should not be allowed maybe. So you really need an urban design review panel at that level that will take care of all these issues right at that point. So I agree with Roger completely. And one, I think I would, in terms of lack of time, I would go to my concluding points. I think the guidelines are a good start. They need a lot of time to be evolved over time. Some of it is like a little bit too rigid. Maybe they need to be more flexible. Like in terms of the commercial use, you say up to 10%. I looked up New York, they allow for 1/3. So it depends on different areas. I think you need to have a range and a review panel that can review not the public open space in isolation, but the whole development. And the other thing that I would also point out is this scare in Hong Kong that there is collusion between developers and government, that nothing gets done as a result. So maybe we need to find a way to change that around, to actually make, because other cities like Singapore, New York even, they actually use developers. In fact, in New York's on the public open space in private developments, they say clearly it's public so open space. If it's given, they give incentives to the developers to actually build more GFA. But we are in a situation where we are slapping building height restrictions, so we are cutting down on that end. And if we want amenities at street level, we might be putting a straitjacket on ourselves. So we need to review that and be more flexible, I think. And with that, I will stop, I think, because you're running out of time.